A black soldier walked into a small bar, hoping to enjoy a quiet evening. But that peace was quickly shattered when a group of bikers entered, hurling jeers and provocations. What they didn't realize was that the man before them wasn't just equipped with sharp military skills, but also possessed patience and integrity as steadfast as steel. Marcus's next actions didn't just leave the bikers speechless. They left an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed the scene, offering a lesson that extended far beyond the four walls of the bar. Before diving into the dramatic twists of this story, be sure to share where you're watching and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next meaningful tale. The faint glow of flickering neon signs illuminated the dusk as Marcus Johnson's old pickup truck pulled into the parking lot of Jack's Tap Room, a small roadside bar off Highway 74 in North Carolina. The bar wasn't anything special, just a regular stop for locals, truck drivers, and weary travelers seeking a cold beer and a moment of respite. Marcus had returned home a week ago after 3 tours of duty overseas. He chose Jack's Tap Room for its quiet charm, hoping for a chance to relax and let go of the burdens he carried. Life in the military had forged Marcus into a strong and composed man, but tonight he simply wanted to be himself. No pressures, no judgments. As the creaky wooden door swung open, it carried with it the lively noise from inside. The bar was filled with the sounds of laughter, the crack of billiard balls colliding, and the drawl of an old country song playing on the jukebox. The golden glow from beer glasses reflected the cozy yet gritty atmosphere. Marcus paused, his eyes sweeping the room. Familiar faces gathered around the pool table, others joked at the bar, and some sat quietly nursing their drinks. He picked a table in the corner where he could survey the room without drawing attention. Near the window, the dim light cast shadows across his face, highlighting the features of a man who had endured much. His camouflage jacket blended into the bar's dim ambiance, though his worn sneakers, out of place but undeniably comfortable, betrayed his desire for solace over appearances. Marcus ordered a glass of water. He wasn't here for beer or attention. He wanted a moment of peace to let his thoughts drift, toward memories of his mother's warm kitchen, the giggles of his young niece, and the comforting aroma of freshly baked pies lingering in his mind. Just as Marcus took his first sip of water, the bar's door slammed open. The sudden rush of noise jolted him back to the present. A group of 6 men entered, their heavy, boots echoing on the wooden floor. Each wore black leather jackets adorned with bold symbols and patches, their tattooed arms rippling with confidence and swagger. Marcus tried to stay lost in his thoughts, but the bikers quickly disrupted the peace he had sought. At the helm was Hank Miller, a grizzled man with salt and pepper hair and piercing eyes. He moved as if he owned the room, his leather jacket bearing old insignias and biker emblems that seemed to declare his untouchable status. Hank's loud laughter filled the room, followed by the heavy steps of his companions. The other patrons, from the bartender to the regulars, seemed to recognize the group's arrival. Subtle shifts in posture and glances around the room spoke volumes. No one wanted trouble. Hank and his friends paid no mind to the uneasy crowd. Instead, Hank's gaze landed squarely on Marcus, sitting quietly in the corner. A sly grin crept across Hank's face as he leaned toward his crew. Whatever he said made the burly man beside him chuckle, followed by a wave of laughter from the group. It wasn't the kind of laughter that lightens a room. It was derisive, dripping with scorn and challenge. "Look at the soldier boy over there," Hank said, loud enough for nearby patrons to hear. "What's he trying to prove, huh?" One of the bikers, a tall man with tattoos snaking down his arms, nudged Hank with a smirk. Bet he's not even a real soldier, just another wannabe looking for attention. Marcus could feel their stares boring into him, though he kept his eyes on his glass. The bar, lively just moments ago, fell uncomfortably quiet as if everyone were holding their breath, anticipating what might happen next. Hank leaned toward one of his buddies and muttered something, then turned his attention back to Marcus with a snide grin. Maybe he thinks that uniform will earn him some respect. Marcus sipped his water slowly, his hands steady, but his eyes had turned sharp. Years of military service had taught him to remain composed under pressure, though the sting of their words was hard to ignore. "Hey, soldier," a louder voice called out, this time from the burly, bearded biker. His tone was unmistakably mocking. "Lost your way? Or do you think this is boot camp?" The group erupted into laughter, their jeers cutting through the slow rhythm of the country tune still playing faintly in the background. A few patrons glanced toward Marcus, their expressions a mix of sympathy and curiosity. Behind the bar, the bartender paused, eyes flicking between the bikers and Marcus, waiting to see how the scene would unfold. Marcus placed his glass on the table deliberately, without a sound. He exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair, his eyes briefly sweeping over the bikers. There was no fear in his gaze, only a calm, measured intensity, like a soldier assessing a battlefield. Hank caught that look. He tilted his head, a smirk playing on his lips. "Oh, looks like he doesn't talk," Hank sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "What's the matter? Waiting for orders from your commanding officer?" Marcus remained silent. He recalled all the times he had encountered men like Hank, bullies who mistook loudness and bravado for strength. But Marcus knew true strength wasn't in words or appearances. It lay in control, and he wasn't about to let their petty taunts undermine his resolve. The bikers' jabs grew bolder, their voices louder, filling the bar with tension. Marcus didn't flinch or retaliate. Instead, he stayed rooted in his quiet strength, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to their aggression. The other patrons edged away, sensing the situation teetering on the brink of escalation. Finally, Hank rose from his seat and faced Marcus directly, his eyes gleaming with defiance. Marcus, still seated, locked eyes with him, a silent warning, firm and unwavering. "If you're looking for a fight," his steady gaze seemed to say, "I'm ready." Marcus could feel the atmosphere in the bar shifting. The laughter from Hank's table grew louder, drowning out the music from the old jukebox. The group's gazes felt like sharp beams boring into his back, their purpose clear: provocation. Every snide comment, every derisive chuckle carried an unmistakable message. "We don't accept your presence here." Marcus remained still, his hands loosely clasped on the table. Outwardly, he appeared calm, but inside his mind was flooded with memories, unpleasant ones. They drew him back to his early days in the military, where, as a black man, he had to prove himself not just through action, but through extraordinary patience. He recalled the first time he donned his uniform, standing in formation as a recruit. Some of the glances cast his way suggested he didn't belong there. One time, during grueling training under the scorching sun, a fellow recruit whispered to another, his tone dripping with disdain, "I don't know why the military lowered its standards to let people like him in." Marcus didn't respond. He simply endured, pushing himself beyond every limit to prove he not only deserved to be there, but excelled beyond expectations. Those memories replayed now, like an old film reel in his mind, but this time he wasn't on a battlefield or in a training camp. He was in a small bar, seeking nothing more than a moment of peace. Taking a deep breath, Marcus loosened his shoulders to maintain his composure. The tension within him wasn't fear. It was a quiet ache, a reminder that no matter how much he had sacrificed and contributed to his country, some people still saw him as less because of his skin color. Across the room, Hank continued his loud banter with the bikers, ensuring that Marcus could hear every word. "Doesn't he feel ridiculous?" Hank scoffed. "Wearing that getup and those sneakers, who's going to believe he's a real soldier?" The group erupted in laughter, their rough voices cutting through the air. Another man, sitting closest to Hank, added, "Maybe he bought that uniform from a thrift store to scam a few free beers." Marcus felt a surge of adrenaline course through him, but he didn't move. He had learned to keep calm, especially in moments like this. He had stood on battlefields, facing genuine danger. Words like these were nothing compared to what he had survived, but that didn't mean they didn't hurt. Remembering his mother's words, Marcus briefly closed his eyes. "You can't change how people see you, but you can decide how you face them." That advice had been his guiding star, helping him navigate prejudice and hostility throughout his life. Hank, irritated by Marcus's lack of reaction, grew bolder. He downed a long swig of beer, then turned back to his crew. "This guy's got some nerve," Hank said loudly, ensuring the entire bar could hear. "Or maybe he doesn't speak English." Again, the group roared with laughter. Some patrons glanced over at Marcus, some with worry, others with curiosity. The bartender stood frozen behind the counter, watching closely, ready to intervene if things spiraled out of control. Marcus raised his head, and for a brief moment, his gaze locked with Hank's. He didn't say a word, but his eyes carried a clear message of unwavering resolve. "Keep trying, but I'm not afraid of you." In that instant, the bar seemed to freeze. Hank squinted, as though trying to gauge the man sitting before him. He set his beer down, a mocking smile creeping across his face. Yet even Hank could sense that Marcus's confidence was no bluff. It wasn't. Bravado. It was the kind of strength forged through genuine trials, something Hank himself had likely never faced. Marcus shifted his gaze to the window, tuning out the jeers still coming from the bikers. He reminded himself that true strength didn't lie in words, but in self-control. His patience wasn't just a shield for himself. It was his way of affirming his worth, a worth that could not be diminished by prejudice or scorn. Hank stood before Marcus's table, his cold gaze seeming to pierce into Marcus's thoughts. Around them, the bar's atmosphere grew quieter as the other patrons began to notice the confrontation forming. Hank tilted his beer slightly, a smirk of derision curling on his lips. "Hey, soldier," he started, his rough voice loud enough for the nearby crowd to hear. "Nice uniform, but something seems off. What kind of soldier wears beat-up sneakers like that?" A snide laugh came from behind Hank as one of the bikers chimed in. "Maybe he borrowed that outfit from somewhere to show off. You don't think we believe you're the real deal, do you?" Marcus raised his head to meet Hank's gaze, his expression unreadable. He didn't respond immediately, instead setting his glass of water on the table with deliberate calmness. His silence seemed to provoke Hank further. The man stepped closer, his smirk sharpening. "No answer, huh?" Hank said louder, his voice cutting through the bar. "What's the matter? Are you scared? Or are you just going to sit there and pretend you deserve to wear that?" Laughter erupted from the group behind Hank. One of them, a wiry man with thinning gray hair, pointed at Marcus and sneered, "I bet he doesn't even know how to salute properly. What do you think, Hank? Probably never made it through basic training." Marcus remained silent, though tension rose within him like a tide. These insults weren't new to him, and he knew they wouldn't be the last. He had learned to maintain his composure even in situations like this, but the sting of their words still cut deep. Hank, frustrated by the lack of a reaction, pushed further. He set his beer down on Marcus's table and leaned in, his eyes narrowing in challenge. "You know," Hank said, his tone dripping with mockery, "I've met a lot of real soldiers in my time. Real ones, not guys who just put on the uniform to get noticed. But you don't look like a soldier. You look like a kid playing dress-up." The words made the air in the bar heavier, the tension almost palpable. A few patrons nearby began to edge away from Marcus's table, clearly wanting no part of any trouble. Behind the counter, the bartender stood motionless, one hand gripping a half-poured beer, his eyes fixed on the scene. "Exactly," another biker shouted, his gravelly laughter breaking through the uneasy silence. "Maybe he just wants someone to buy him a drink. There are plenty of guys like that out there." Marcus finally lifted his head, his gaze locking with Hank's for a brief moment. It wasn't a look of fear or anger, but of a man who knew exactly who he was and felt no need to prove it to anyone. "I don't need to explain myself to you," Marcus said, his voice low and steady, each word deliberate. Hank hesitated for a beat, his smirk faltering slightly, but his arrogance wouldn't allow him to back down. He slammed his palm onto Marcus's table, causing the glass of water to rattle. "Oh, so you think you're better than me?" Hank said, his voice rising to command the attention of the entire bar. "You walk in here wearing that uniform, sit there like you're some kind of hero. But I don't see a hero. I see a fraud." The bikers' jeering resumed. One of them slapped the bar counter, laughing uproariously. "Our hero here doesn't even have proper combat boots. What's next? Gonna tell us about your imaginary war stories?" Marcus held Hank's gaze unflinching. He straightened in his chair, his hands resting lightly on the table, and his voice, though calm, carried a weight that silenced the room. "I don't need to prove anything to you or anyone else here, but if you keep pushing, you'll regret it." The words weren't shouted, yet they resonated with unyielding authority. The bar fell into an uneasy stillness. Even those who dared not intervene couldn't tear their eyes away from the confrontation. Hank leaned slightly closer, his narrowed eyes scrutinizing Marcus. He wasn't used to being met with anything but fear or rage, and this composed defiance unsettled him. Still, Hank refused to relent. Instead, his smirk returned, though his tone darkened. "You think you're the toughest guy in here, don't you?" Hank said, his voice low as if bracing for a storm. Marcus remained seated, his gaze steady, though his hand gripped the edge of the table tightly. Hank's words weren't just a personal insult. They struck at the heart of every brother and sister Marcus had served alongside, those who had sacrificed everything for their country. "Are you even listening to me?" Hank snarled, and in a sudden, aggressive move, he reached out to grab Marcus by the collar, intending to yank him to his feet. The move stunned not only Hank's biker gang, but also everyone in the bar. The bartender froze, setting his beer glass on the counter, his eyes darting toward the brewing confrontation. A few patrons instinctively stepped back, fearing that things were about to spiral out of control. Before Hank could tighten his grip, Marcus acted. With the precision and speed of a seasoned soldier, he grabbed Hank's wrist in a lightning-quick motion. In one fluid movement, Marcus twisted Hank's arm and yanked it backward, forcing the larger man to his knees. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Hank's bulky frame was pinned against the table, his face pressed into the wooden surface. Marcus had locked Hank's arm in a simple yet effective hold, one that left him completely immobilized. "Stop," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm, each word carrying an unmistakable warning. "I didn't want to do this, but you left me no choice." The bar fell silent. Hank's gang stood frozen, wide-eyed, and visibly shocked at how quickly their leader had been subdued. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered man, hesitated as if to step forward. But Marcus's sharp, unwavering glare stopped him in his tracks. "Let me go," Hank bellowed, his voice filled with rage and humiliation. He struggled against Marcus's grip, but the strength and technique behind the hold rendered his efforts useless. Marcus kept Hank pinned, his eyes scanning the rest of the bikers. "No one here wants this to get worse," he said, his tone calm, but carrying an undeniable authority. One of the bikers, attempting to defuse the situation, raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Hey man," he said, his voice shaky but conciliatory. "We're not looking for trouble. Hank was just messing around. It's nothing serious." Marcus turned his gaze to the man, his expression unyielding. "He wasn't joking," Marcus replied firmly. "And if you think this is how you treat a soldier, you're wrong." Hank continued to squirm, his face contorted with anger and frustration. "You'll pay for this," he growled, but his voice betrayed his helplessness more than his menace. Marcus inhaled deeply before releasing Hank's arm, letting him stumble backward. Hank rose unsteadily to his feet, clutching his arm and glaring at Marcus, his face flushed with a mix of fury and embarrassment. "This is your warning," Marcus said, his tone even but loaded with weight. "If you push further, I won't hold back." Hank froze, staring at Marcus with an intensity that hinted at lingering anger, but he knew he'd lost this round. His gang members shuffled awkwardly behind him, avoiding eye contact with both Marcus and the other patrons. Marcus returned to his seat, calmly picking up his glass of water and taking a sip. He didn't spare Hank or his gang another glance. To him, the confrontation was over, though he was fully aware that someone like Hank wouldn't easily let go of a perceived humiliation. Around the bar, the other patrons murmured in hushed tones, the tension still thick in the air. The bartender exhaled a quiet sigh of relief, his hand gripping a phone he'd been ready to use to call the police if necessary. Hank took a step back, his glare never leaving Marcus. "You'll regret this," he muttered, his voice low but laced with threat. Marcus didn't respond. His gaze drifted out the window, as though Hank was no longer worth acknowledging. Hank stood there, clutching his phone tightly, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for support. Yet, instead of receiving the backing he expected, he was met with puzzled and uneasy stares. His face turned an even deeper shade of red, from anger and the growing realization that things weren't unfolding as he had anticipated. He needed to regain control, assert his authority, and salvage his bruised ego. "Police, hurry up!" Hank barked into the phone, deliberately raising his voice to cut through the heavy silence blanketing the room. "I've been assaulted. That guy's impersonating a soldier to scam people." A few murmurs rippled through the bar. A woman at a nearby table leaned toward her companion and whispered, "Impersonating a soldier? He doesn't seem like the type." Her friend nodded, glancing at Marcus with skepticism and sympathy. It's strange. If he were a soldier, why would Hank act like this? Behind the bar, the bartender, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes, set down the cloth he was holding and stepped forward. "What are you doing, Hank?" he asked, his voice low but firm. "This isn't necessary." Hank whipped around, his eyes blazing. "Not necessary? That guy attacked me? I'm not going to let someone like him just walk around here like nothing happened." The bartender shook his head, turning his gaze to Marcus, who remained silent at his table. Their eyes met briefly, Marcus's calm, measured gaze revealing neither fear nor justification. The bartender paused, then spoke again. "Hank, I saw everything. You brought this on yourself, and I think you should calm down before you make this worse." Hank's mouth dropped open, stunned by the rebuttal. "You're taking his side?" he almost shouted. "Can't you see I was attacked? You're defending a fraud?" Meanwhile, Marcus sat motionless. His hands rested on the table, his gaze locked steadily on Hank. The accusations seemed to bounce off him without effect, his composure unshaken. Marcus wasn't just observing Hank, he was gauging the reactions of the crowd, knowing their judgment would steer the situation. An older man, seated nearby and wearing a faded military jacket, suddenly spoke up. "I served in the military for over 20 years, he said, his voice steady and deliberate. "And looking at this man, I can tell you he's no fake. His demeanor, the way he carries himself, that's someone who's been through things only real soldiers understand." The room's atmosphere shifted. A few patrons nodded in agreement, their eyes flicking from Hank to Marcus. A young woman rested her hand on her chin, clearly piecing together the events that had unfolded. Hank, realizing the tide of opinion was turning against him, grew visibly flustered. He raised his voice, attempting to drown out the growing support for Marcus. "Don't let him fool you. The police will be here soon, and we'll know the truth." Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice warm but commanding, each word landing with the weight of unshakable conviction. "You want the truth, Hank?" he said, his gaze unwavering. "I don't need the police to prove who I am. But I think you might need them to prove your claims, that I assaulted you. Are you sure you want to keep this farce going?" Marcus's words struck Hank like a blow to his already fragile pride. He hesitated, his eyes darting nervously. Before he could respond, the sound of police sirens pierced the tense silence, their flashing blue and red lights spilling through the bar's windows. Every head turned toward the door, waiting to see what would happen next. The bartender approached Marcus, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "You don't need to worry," he said, his voice low but resolute. "I'll tell them exactly what I saw." Marcus nodded, a faint smile flickering across his lips. He didn't need to defend himself. Truth had a way of speaking for itself. And deep down, Marcus understood that this moment was about more than just his confrontation with Hank. It was a chance to affirm that patience and integrity could triumph over hostility and prejudice. Less than 10 minutes later, the police sirens blared outside, their flashing lights casting an even heavier tension over the already strained atmosphere. The bar's door swung open, and 2 officers stepped inside. The male officer, tall with a clean-cut look and a sharply pressed uniform, stepped forward. His voice carried authority as he scanned the room. "We received a report of impersonation and assault. Who's involved here?" Hank wasted no time, stepping forward with a voice filled with anger and indignation. "It's him!" he yelled, pointing directly at Marcus. "That guy attacked me, and he's not a real soldier. I want him arrested right now." The male officer turned toward Marcus, his eyes scrutinizing him. But before he could speak, another voice cut through the tension. "Hold on," the bartender interjected, stepping forward and resting his hands on the bar. His voice was calm but firm. "I saw everything. Hank was the aggressor. Marcus only defended himself." A murmur of agreement spread through the bar. Another patron, sitting near the jukebox, spoke up. "That's right. Hank went after him first. Marcus didn't do anything wrong." The atmosphere grew heavier with conflicting whispers as the crowd processed the new claims. Some nodded in agreement, while others stayed quiet, their eyes locked on the officers. The female officer, younger and softer-spoken, quickly jotted notes into a small notepad before glancing up at Hank and Marcus. "Mr. Marcus, do you have anything to say?" she asked, her voice professional yet calm. Marcus, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. His voice was steady, carrying the weight of experience. "I didn't come here to cause trouble. Hank initiated the conflict. He provoked me, and when he attacked, I only defended myself. I never claimed to be a soldier, but he's been accusing me from the start." "Liar!" Hank roared, his face flushing deeper with rage. "He's lying. I can prove he's not a soldier. Ask him where he served. Ask him." The male officer signaled for Hank to calm down, but didn't ignore his demand. Turning back to Marcus, his gaze sharp, the officer asked, "Mr. Marcus, Hank claims you're not a soldier. If you have any way to prove otherwise, now would be the time." Marcus stayed quiet for a moment, scanning the room. His eyes met the concerned and curious faces of the patrons. Some nodded in quiet support, but their approval didn't ease the weight of the moment. He took a deep breath, ready to confront the accusations and the skepticism directed his way. As the tension in the bar thickened like an unbroken fog, a steady, commanding voice rose from a shadowed corner near the window. "Hold on." All eyes turned toward the sound. A man stood up, his demeanor calm, but radiating an undeniable strength. It was Sam Walker, a veteran with graying hair and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of countless stories. He wore a simple button-down shirt, but the way he walked and the unflinching gaze he directed at Hank drew the attention of everyone in the room. "I think it's time I said something," Sam began, his voice low but authoritative, breaking the suffocating silence. "I'm a veteran, served 20 years in the military, and I know this man." He pointed to Marcus, his expression resolute. Marcus turned to look at Sam, momentarily surprised but deeply moved. In the dim light of the bar, Sam's face was lined with the marks of hardship and experience. Marcus recognized him immediately. It was Sam Walker, his former commanding officer from their most grueling years in Afghanistan. "He's not an imposter," Sam continued, his voice ringing with conviction. "Marcus Johnson is a real soldier. We served together, side by side, in some of the harshest conditions imaginable. I can vouch for him to everyone here. He served this country with honor and loyalty." The bar seemed to hold its breath. The patrons exchanged whispers, their glances at Marcus shifting from suspicion to respect. The bartender, who had been quietly observing, nodded in agreement. Hank turned to Sam, his face a mix of confusion and anger. "How do I know you're not making this up?" he sputtered, his voice lacking the confidence it once had. Sam stepped closer to Hank, locking eyes with him in a way that seemed to pierce through his bravado. "Do you think I, a veteran, would stand here and lie to protect someone pretending to be a soldier?" Sam said, his tone cutting. "Don't insult my intelligence. and don't insult the honor of those who sacrificed everything." The group of bikers behind Hank remained silent, their earlier confidence drained. A few of them lowered their eyes, clearly wanting no further involvement. Hank, cornered and humiliated, took a step back, though his eyes still burned with resentment. "He's lying," Hank muttered, but his weak protest lacked the bite it once carried. Sam allowed himself a small, humorless smile. It wasn't a smile of amusement, but one of quiet assurance. "If you want to keep throwing out accusations, I'll gladly take you to a military court and let them handle it. But if I were you, I'd stop now before things get worse." The words landed like a final blow to Hank's fragile ego. He didn't reply, standing there with his face flushed in a mixture of anger and embarrassment. At that moment, Marcus stood up, taking a step forward, his eyes fixed on Hank. "I warned you before. Don't push me to act. But if you want to take this further, I'm ready to face you any time." The air in the bar felt heavier than ever. Hank glanced at Marcus, then at Sam, and finally at his group of bikers. None of them seemed eager to support him anymore. A few even shuffled back, clearly wanting to distance themselves from the situation. "I'll be back," Hank growled, his voice low and venomous. "This isn't over." "Come back if you want," Marcus replied, his tone calm and unwavering. "But next time, you won't have the chance to justify your actions." Hank gritted his teeth and stormed toward the door, his boots thudding heavily on the wooden floor. His gang quickly followed, their retreat marked by the loud slam of the bar's door behind them. When Hank and his group were gone, the atmosphere in the bar softened. The patrons gradually returned to their drinks, but no one could ignore what had just transpired. The bartender walked over to Marcus and said quietly, "Thanks for keeping your cool. Not everyone could have done that." Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I didn't want trouble. I just wanted to keep things peaceful." Sam, standing nearby, placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder and smiled faintly. "You did well, Marcus. I'm proud to have served with you." "Thank you, Sam," Marcus replied, his voice steady but heartfelt. "Your support means a lot to me." Sam nodded, his eyes reflecting admiration. Men like Hank will always exist. What matters is how we deal with them, and you handled it perfectly. Marcus sat back down and took a sip of water, the tension slowly draining from his body. He felt relief not just for defending his dignity, but for the unexpected support of an old comrade and the respect of the bar's patrons. Before long, whispers about Marcus and his confrontation with Hank spread among the crowd. Some debated how Marcus had kept his composure under Hank's relentless provocation. One customer, seated in a corner, chuckled and remarked, "The guy's like a rock. If it were me, I'd have lost my cool a long time ago." The bartender overheard and smiled, replying, "That's why I respect Marcus. He's not just strong. He knows how to control his strength. Not everyone can do that." Sam turned to Marcus, his expression curious. "You okay, Marcus? You look like you've got something on your mind." Marcus sighed, his gaze distant. "I'm fine. Sometimes situations like this remind me of what I've been through. I can't help but think about my old comrades, those who aren't here anymore." Sam said nothing, understanding the weight of Marcus's words. He, too, had felt the ache of loss. They both fell silent for a moment, the soft hum of the jukebox filling the void. A little later, an elderly woman approached Marcus's table, carrying a steaming cup of tea. She placed it in front of him and said gently, You did well, young man. Don't let people like Hank make you doubt yourself." Marcus smiled, touched by her kindness. "Thank you, ma'am. That means a lot." She nodded and returned to her seat, leaving Marcus with the warm cup. The bartender, watching the scene unfold, couldn't help but grin. "You know, Marcus, sometimes a small gesture like that is enough to remind us there's still good in the world." Marcus nodded, feeling a quiet warmth spread through him. "You're right. Sometimes I get so caught up in the negativity that I forget about the good." Across the room, two patrons talked loudly enough for Marcus to hear. "He's not just some guy. Did you see the way he stood his ground without resorting to violence? That's rare." The other nodded. "Exactly. But it's more than that. What makes him stand out is his calmness and decisiveness. Not everyone can keep a cool head like that." Though they weren't speaking directly to him, their words encouraged Marcus. He took a sip of tea, letting its warmth wash over him, not just from the drink but from the quiet recognition of his actions. As the night wore on and the bar emptied, the bartender approached Marcus while clearing glasses. "Marcus, if you ever need a place to unwind, this bar is always here." "Thanks," Marcus replied, his tone warm with gratitude. "You're a good man, and I couldn't have handled this without you and the others here." The bartender shrugged and smiled. "Sometimes all we need is a little support. That's how the world should work, don't you think?" Marcus nodded, standing to put on his coat. As he headed for the door, he paused and turned to Sam, the bartender, and the remaining patrons. He gave them a genuine smile. "Thank you, everyone. I'll remember tonight." Sam waved. "Anytime you need a place to come back to, Marcus, this will always be your second home." Stepping out into the cool night, Marcus felt a sense of peace. The street lights reflected on the damp pavement from a drizzle, casting a soft glow. He pulled his coat tighter, the warmth in his heart undiminished. Though the road ahead would undoubtedly hold challenges, he knew he would never face them alone. A few days after the incident at the bar, Marcus was busy working on his old pickup truck in the yard. The engine murmured as he inspected its parts, his hands smeared with grease. The surrounding air was peaceful, filled only with the rustle of leaves and the occasional chirping of birds, but the tranquility was interrupted by the distant roar of a motorcycle approaching. Marcus looked up, wrench still in hand. A motorcycle rolled to a stop in front of his gate, and stepping off was none other than Bill Taylor, one of Hank's biker crew members from the other night. Bill removed his helmet, his expression hesitant and apologetic as he looked at Marcus. He stood there for a few moments as if gathering the courage to step through the gate. Marcus stayed silent, his gaze steady, neither hostile nor welcoming. He didn't know why Bill was here, but he was ready to face whatever came next. "Hi, Marcus," Bill began, his voice slightly shaky. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Marcus set down his wrench, stood up straight, and wiped his hands on a rag. "What do you need?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. Bill stepped through the gate, raising his hand slightly as if to show he meant no harm. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, his voice sincere. "I'm here to apologize." Marcus raised an eyebrow, his gaze unwavering. "Apologize." Bill nodded, taking a deep breath as if preparing himself. "I was wrong," he said, his tone now steadier. "What happened at the bar? It wasn't right. I let Hank drag me into it. He knows how to rile people up, and I let myself get caught in his trap. I said things I shouldn't have, and I want to apologize to you for that." Marcus remained stern, but didn't interrupt. Bill continued, his eyes filled with remorse. Hank, he's always been the dominant one in our group. He makes everyone feel like they have to follow his lead, even when we know it's wrong. And I was wrong for not standing up to him. Bill paused for a moment, meeting Marcus's gaze. I know an apology doesn't fix everything, but I want to change. And I figured if I didn't start by apologizing to you, I'd always be a coward. Marcus stayed silent, his eyes studying Bill as if searching for genuine intent. How do I know you're serious? Marcus asked, his voice low but pointed. Bill didn't flinch. He stood straighter, placing a hand on his chest as if to affirm his sincerity. You don't have to believe me right now, he said, but I'm not here because of Hank or anyone else. I'm here for me. I don't want to keep being the kind of person who's driven by hate. I want to change, and this is where I start. Marcus furrowed his brow slightly, his gaze cautious but perceptive. Yet, as Bill spoke, Marcus began to sense a real honesty in his words. You know, Marcus said after a long pause, I've met plenty of people who promised to change, but not all of them followed through. I know, Bill replied without hesitation. I'm not asking for your forgiveness right now, but I want you to know I'm serious. I don't want to be part of hatred and pointless actions anymore. Marcus took a deep breath, then slowly relaxed his posture. He gave a small nod, a subtle sign of acceptance. An apology is a start, Marcus said, his voice steady, but change takes more than words. Don't do this for me. Do it for yourself. Bill nodded, his face showing a mix of gratitude and resolve. Thank you, he said softly but sincerely. I won't let you down. Marcus studied Bill for a moment longer before extending his hand. Bill hesitated, surprised, but quickly reached out to shake Marcus's hand firmly, as if sealing a silent pact. All right, Marcus said with a faint smile. Let's see what you can do. Bill nodded again, then turned back to his motorcycle. He put on his helmet but paused before starting the engine, looking back at Marcus. Thank you, Marcus. I know this isn't easy, but I promise I'll change. Marcus gave a slight nod, his expression calm. He watched as Bill rode off, the sound of the motorcycle fading down the gravel road. When the sound of Bill's motorcycle had disappeared, Marcus stood silently in his yard, his eyes lingering on the dusty road. He didn't immediately return to working on the truck. Instead, he leaned against its side, crossing his arms as his mind replayed what had just happened. Bill's apology, earnest and unexpected, felt like a small but meaningful puzzle piece in the larger picture Marcus was trying to piece together. He hadn't expected someone who had once sided with Hank to have the courage to come to his home, face him, and admit their wrongdoing. It made Marcus think not only about Bill, but also about himself, about the choices he had made when confronting prejudice and hostility. He recalled every moment in the bar, from Hank's contemptuous gaze to the mocking tone of the bikers. Their words weren't just an attack on him, but on everything he stood for, a black veteran who had dedicated his life to protecting his country. The insults weren't new to Marcus. From the day he joined the military, he'd become all too familiar with proving his worth not just through his actions, but also through his unparalleled patience. The fight isn't always on the battlefield, Marcus thought. It's everywhere, in words, in looks, and even in the silence that judges. He remembered his early days in the military, where skepticism followed him like a shadow because of his skin color. There were whispered comments behind his back, scrutinizing glances, and sometimes blatant racial slurs. But Marcus never let those things break him. He chose to prove his worth through determination and steadfastness. Those years forged him into someone not just physically strong, but emotionally resilient. The memories brought his thoughts back to Sam Walker, his old commanding officer who had stood up for him in the bar. Sam hadn't just vouched for Marcus as a soldier, he had done so with pride and respect. Marcus realized that Sam's defense wasn't just for him personally, it was for the values they had fought to uphold together: loyalty, honor, and unity. Sometimes it only takes one person standing by your side to make all the difference, Marcus thought. Sam's support had shifted the perspective of everyone in the bar. Suspicion gave way to respect, not because of aggression or retaliation, but because of the integrity and calm that Marcus had shown. But what lingered in Marcus's mind most was Bill's apology. Bill hadn't just come to offer empty words. He had confronted his faults, acknowledged them, and chosen to change. For Marcus, that was a victory far greater than any confrontation. It showed him that patience and dignity could do more than protect. They could inspire others to rethink their actions. Change doesn't happen overnight, Marcus reminded himself. But if I can move just one person, even one, it's progress. He thought about people like Hank, whose hatred and prejudice ran deep. Hank might never change, but Bill's actions proved that not everyone was beyond redemption. Some people, given the opportunity and understanding, would choose to make amends. Looking up at the sky, where soft clouds drifted across the horizon, Marcus felt a quiet resolve. The battle never really ends, he thought, but it doesn't always require weapons or sharp words. Sometimes, patience and integrity are the strongest tools we have. Returning to the truck, Marcus resumed his work, his mind lighter now. The rhythmic sound of the wrench against metal filled the yard, accompanied by the gentle hum of engines waiting for his attention. This work, though simple, was Marcus's solace. It kept his hands busy and his mind grounded, giving him peace amid the chaos of past and present. He knew challenges lay ahead. People like Hank wouldn't disappear, and prejudice wouldn't vanish overnight. But Marcus also knew he wasn't fighting alone. The memory of Sam's steadfast defense, the bartender's support, and the compassion of bar patrons fueled his determination. These moments were like small flames, warm in his heart and reminding him that the fight against prejudice wasn't in vain. Amid his work, a faint knock at the workshop door broke his concentration. Marcus looked up to see a boy of about 14 peeking in timidly, clutching an old bicycle helmet. Marcus set his tools down, wiped his hands, and walked over. "Hey there, kid. Need some help?" The boy looked up at Marcus, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and hesitation. "I heard you're good at fixing things," he said shyly. "My bike's brakes are broken. Can you fix it?" Marcus chuckled, sensing the boy's sincerity. He bent down and took the bike. "Let's take a look." As Marcus worked, the boy began asking questions. "I heard my dad say you were a soldier. Is that true?" Marcus paused briefly, but nodded. "I was. Now I fix trucks, and today, bikes. Helping out, however, I can." The boy watched Marcus intently. "I think you're cool. I want to be like you when I grow up, helping people." The boy's simple words brought a smile to Marcus's face. He didn't realize that his actions had left such an impression. When the brakes were fixed, he stood up and patted the bike seat. "All set. Next time, make sure to check your brakes before you ride far, okay?" The boy nodded enthusiastically. "Thank you, sir. I'll remember." As the boy rode off, Marcus watched him until he disappeared down the road. He exhaled deeply, not out of fatigue but from a sense of fulfillment. Perhaps the most profound changes weren't always the grand ones. Sometimes they began with small acts, fixing a bike or standing firm against a prejudice in a bar. The afternoon passed, and Marcus continued his work. Each car he repaired and each customer who left with a smile served as proof that he was on the right path. Memories of Sam and those who had stood by him became a powerful source of motivation, fueling his strength to face the challenges ahead. As he tightened the last bolt of the day, Marcus smiled softly. His heart was filled with hope. The hope that every small action he took could make a difference, one person at a time. He believed that with patience and steadfast faith, the world could change, even if only in a small corner. And for Marcus, that was enough to keep moving forward. As Marcus finished repairing the old pickup truck, he sat on the front steps of his house, his eyes gazing toward the vast expanse of the horizon. The sunset bathed the sky in hues of orange and purple, creating a serene and almost magical ambiance. Yet, despite the tranquil surroundings, Marcus's mind remained restless, mulling over the events of the past few days. He thought about Bill's heartfelt apology. For the first time since the incident at the bar, Marcus felt a shift, a glimmer of something different. It wasn't just Bill's words. It was the respectful looks from those who had witnessed the events. It was more than a fleeting moment. It was a spark of hope that perhaps, deep within those once prejudice-filled hearts, an awakening was beginning to take root. The next day, Marcus returned to the bar. He wasn't looking for another confrontation. He simply wanted to see if the chapter had truly closed. As he walked in, he immediately noticed the difference. The eyes that once held cold judgment or skepticism now carried warmth and respect. A few people even gave him subtle nods, a quiet but significant gesture. The bartender emerged from behind the counter, wearing a soft smile. "Marcus," he began, "what you did that day, keeping your composure and dignity despite the insults, is something not many could manage. Everyone here saw it, and we respect you for it." Marcus didn't respond immediately. He nodded slightly, expressing his gratitude with his eyes. But before he could say anything, the bartender continued. "We've been talking. A few of us here think it's time we did something to acknowledge the contributions of veterans. We want to organize a small event, not flashy, just something to honor people like you." Marcus was momentarily taken aback. The idea was unexpected. A small ceremony to honor veterans. It wasn't just recognition. It was a clear sign that the community's perspective was beginning to evolve. An older man, sitting in a corner, chimed in. "I'm a veteran too, Marcus. I know what it feels like to be doubted and judged, especially after leaving the service. But what you did reminded me that even when we're no longer in uniform, we can still make a difference." The bar began to buzz with excitement. Several patrons voiced their agreement, volunteering to help bring the idea to life. Marcus sat quietly, listening, a warm sense of fulfillment swelling in his chest. What he had done wasn't just about defending his honor, it had ignited a ripple of positivity in the community. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus headed home. In the dim glow of evening, his small house stood like a bastion of peace amid the world's chaos. Stepping into his living room, Marcus's eyes landed on the wooden box his father had kept on a shelf. Opening it, he carefully retrieved a worn silver pocket watch, an heirloom his father had deeply cherished. The watch wasn't just a keepsake, it symbolized the values his father had instilled in him: patience, loyalty, and dignity. The scratches on its surface bore silent witness to the trials his father had endured. Now, Marcus realized, it was his turn to carry those lessons forward. Holding the watch, Marcus studied it in the dim light of the room. His thoughts drifted through the recent days: the contemptuous glare of Hank, the unexpected support from Sam, and Bill's genuine apology. He understood that the battle against prejudice wouldn't be won in a single day or a single moment, but every small step could pave the way for meaningful change. Stepping onto his porch, Marcus stood silently under the night sky, now painted in deep shades of blue with stars beginning to sparkle. With the watch in his hand, he contemplated the future. He knew he couldn't transform the world overnight, but he also knew he wasn't alone in the journey. There were people like Sam who stood for truth, and people like Bill, willing to embrace change. Taking a deep breath, Marcus felt the cool evening air fill his lungs. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but he trusted that integrity and patience would be his guiding lights, helping him make a difference. One person, one day at a time. He smiled, his gaze steady with determination. The silver pocket watch, resting snugly in his palm, served as a quiet reminder that no matter how difficult the world might become, the values he carried would always shine bright. The Veterans Recognition Ceremony took place on a warm weekend afternoon in the open courtyard behind the bar. In the days leading up to the event, the entire community came together to prepare. Some brought tables and chairs, others raised flagpoles, and families contributed food and drinks to create a warm and welcoming atmosphere. On a modest but dignified stage adorned with American flags waving gently in the breeze, a long table displayed medals, photographs, and cherished memorabilia of veterans. Marcus arrived early, dressed in a dark suit, the silver pocket watch his father had once cherished resting in his breast pocket. Standing quietly near the stage, he observed as the gathering took shape. Familiar faces from the bar were interspersed with others he didn't recognize. Families with young children pointed to the flags and medals, sharing stories about past sacrifices. The air carried an unusual peace, layered with deep respect. The bartender, who had championed the idea of the ceremony, approached Marcus with a cup of coffee in hand. "Marcus," he began softly, "I'm so glad you came. Today isn't just about honoring you. It's a chance for this community to recognize the value of what veterans have done." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, a small smile gracing his face. "I didn't expect this," he replied, "but if this helps people understand the importance of sacrifice and unity, then it's a remarkable gesture." The crowd grew, filling the seats. On stage, Sam Walker, Marcus's former commanding officer, stepped forward in full uniform, his medals gleaming. A hush fell over the audience as Sam adjusted the microphone, his eyes sweeping across the crowd. "Today," Sam began, his voice steady and commanding, "we gather not only to remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice, but also to honor those who continue to fight daily battles, even without a uniform. These individuals defend the values that make us strong as a nation and as a community. One of those people is here today, Marcus Johnson." Sam turned toward Marcus, gesturing for him to stand. All eyes shifted to him. After a brief moment of silence, applause erupted, filling the courtyard. It wasn't the thunderous applause of spectacle. It was heartfelt, born of genuine respect. Sam continued, "Marcos is more than a soldier. He represents patience, integrity, and courage. These qualities not only helped him overcome challenges on the battlefield, but also in daily life, where injustice and prejudice still exist." Marcus rose and walked toward the stage as the crowd made way for him. His steps were measured and confident, his gaze meeting those of the attendees, familiar and unfamiliar alike. On stage, he stood beside Sam, accepting a small commemorative medal prepared by the community. "Thank you all," Marcus said, his voice deep and earnest. "I never imagined standing here today, but I'm proud to be part of this community, a place where even small changes can spark something meaningful. This reminds me that together we can build a fairer and better world." The applause returned, louder and more sustained, echoing through the space. Afterward, other veterans were invited to the stage. They lined up, each displaying expressions ranging from pride to emotion, some even shedding tears. As the veterans stood side by side, the crowd rose to their feet, clapping in a collective show of gratitude for their quiet dedication. When the ceremony ended, the golden light of sunset bathed the courtyard. Marcus lingered near the stage, observing as people began to disperse. Many approached him to shake his hand and share heartfelt thanks. The bartender placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you for giving us the chance to do this," he said. "Our community is better because of people like you." Marcus simply smiled without saying a word. He stepped forward, standing quietly in the yard, now bathed in soft, fading sunlight. In his hand was his father's silver pocket watch, resting securely in his pocket throughout the ceremony. He opened it, gazing at the old scratches his father once referred to as the scars of battles fought. Marcus looked up at the sky, his heart swelling with hope. He knew the fight for justice and respect would never truly end, but he also understood that he wasn't fighting it alone. This community, people like Sam, Bill, and even strangers who now saw him for who he was, would be the motivation that kept him moving forward on his journey. The ceremony was more than just an event. It was a symbol of a fresh beginning, where integrity, patience, and unity could erase prejudice and pave the way for a brighter future. Marcus Johnson proved that patience and dignity can triumph over hate and prejudice. What are your thoughts on how Marcus handled this situation? If you were in his position, what would you have done? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share this inspiring story with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful content. Thank you for watching.